Power builds walls. First to protect itself. Then to celebrate itself. Finally, to entomb itself. This is not metaphor. This is the iron law of empires, repeated with metronomic precision across continents and centuries. The pattern is immutable. A ruler, drunk on triumph, constructs a monument to his supremacy. He fills it with splendor beyond comprehension, gold leaf catching the light of 10,000 candles, marble corridors stretching toward infinity, gardens where even the trees are arranged by rank. He believes he is building heaven on earth. In reality, he is building a cage. And the walls that keep the world out will ultimately keep reality out as well. Inside these palaces, a parallel universe takes form. Time moves differently. Information is filtered through 1,000 intermediaries, each with their own agenda. The sounds of the street, the cries of the hungry, the curses of the desperate, the grinding machinery of an economy in distress, all of it fades to silence before reaching the throne room. The ruler hears only what the palace wants him to hear. And empires, separated from the soil that feeds them, inevitably wither. The chessboard stretches before us across 5 centuries and 3 continents. In Beijing, the dragon throne sits at the center of 9,999 rooms, where the Son of Heaven is surrounded by 10,000 eunuchs who whisper poison in his ear. In Versailles, the Sun King creates a court so magnificent that French nobility abandons their estates to beg for the privilege of watching him eat breakfast. In Constantinople, Byzantine emperors play games of intrigue behind purple curtains while Turkish armies sharpen their blades outside the walls. 3 cases. 3 empires at the apex of their power. 3 golden cages. The architecture differs, but the blueprint for catastrophe remains the same. We begin in China, where the most magnificent prison ever constructed would become the tomb of a dynasty. In 1420, the third Ming Emperor Yongle completed the greatest architectural achievement in human history. The Forbidden City, 178 acres of imperial supremacy laid out with mathematical precision in the heart of Beijing. 980 buildings. 8,886 rooms, although legend insisted there were 9,999, precisely one less than the Jade Emperor's celestial palace, because even the Son of Heaven must show humility before the gods. The numbers barely capture the reality. This was not merely a palace. It was a city-state within a city, a hermetically sealed universe operating under its own laws of physics. The emperor lived at the exact center, the cosmic axis around which all China theoretically revolved. Every door, every courtyard, every ceremonial pathway reinforced a single message: the emperor is not merely powerful. He is divine. He is untouchable. He is separate from the mundane world where ordinary humans struggle and bleed. For 2 centuries, the system worked. Ming China was the world's most sophisticated civilization, culturally dominant, economically unmatched, technologically advanced. The Forbidden City was the crown jewel, and the emperor was the jewel within the crown. Ambassadors from vassal states would prostrate themselves 9 times, pressing their foreheads against cold marble, never raising their eyes to glimpse the dragon throne. This was the theater of absolute power, and it was spectacular. But theater has a peculiar quality: the audience eventually forgets that the stage is not the world. The Ming emperors made a catastrophic miscalculation. To maintain the sanctity of the inner palace, they imported an army of eunuchs, castrated men who could serve the imperial concubines without threatening the purity of the bloodline. By the late Ming period, the Forbidden City housed over 20,000 of them. They were meant to be servants. Neutered, powerless, invisible. But nature abhors a vacuum, and the eunuchs found themselves uniquely positioned at the intersection of power and access. The emperor, trapped in an endless cycle of ceremonial obligations, waking at 4 a.m. for court audiences, reviewing memorials from ministers he never met, performing Buddhist rituals until nightfall, increasingly relied on his eunuchs to manage the minutiae of governance. The eunuchs became gatekeepers. And gatekeepers become kingmakers. Enter Wei Zhongxian. A gambler who castrated himself to escape his creditors, he rose through cunning and ruthlessness to become the most powerful man in China during the 1620s. With the teenage emperor effectively imprisoned by protocol, Wei accumulated power that surpassed any official in the empire. He created secret police organizations that terrorized officials in the provinces. He compiled blacklists of his enemies, reformers who dared to speak truth, scholars who remembered that eunuchs were once forbidden from even touching state documents. One by one, they were arrested, tortured, executed. The Donglin faction, a group of idealistic bureaucrats who believed government should serve the people rather than palace intrigue, was systematically destroyed. Yang Lian and Gao Panglong, men who had dedicated their lives to honest administration, died screaming in Wei's dungeons. Their crime? Attempting to inform the emperor of the corruption metastasizing through the empire. But the emperor never heard their warnings. He was 40 layers of silk and ceremony removed from reality. By the time information reached the throne room, it had been filtered, diluted, repackaged into a form that would not disturb the cosmic order. Meanwhile, beyond the vermillion walls, China was coming apart. The empire that looked so solid from within the forbidden city was riddled with cracks. Peasant rebellions erupted as agricultural systems collapsed under the weight of taxation designed to fund palace luxuries. The treasury, drained by eunuch corruption and military campaigns that achieved nothing, could no longer pay the armies guarding the northern frontier. And beyond that frontier, the Manchu tribes were unifying, growing stronger, watching. In 1644, the math caught up with the theater. A rebel army led by a former postal clerk named Li Zicheng marched on Beijing. The Ming Emperor, finally comprehending that his empire had evaporated while he performed rituals in the Hall of Supreme Harmony, climbed Coal Hill behind the Forbidden City and hanged himself from a tree. The Manchu armies then swept in, claiming the mandate of heaven for themselves. The new Qing dynasty inherited the Forbidden City. They understood the danger. They had watched the Ming destroy themselves from the outside. Qing emperors initially tried to break the pattern, to maintain contact with reality, to limit eunuch power. For a time, it worked. But the cage has its own gravity. By the late 19th century, the cycle had completed itself again. Empress Dowager Cixi, the power behind the throne, had the reform-minded Guangxu emperor imprisoned on an island in the middle of Zongnanhai, accessible only by a single controlled causeway. When foreign powers demanded China modernize or be carved into colonies, Cixi, surrounded by advisors who told her what she wanted to hear, made the catastrophic decision to support the Boxer rebellion against Western influence. The result was Beijing's occupation by 8 foreign armies and the Qing regime on the brink of total collapse. The pattern had repeated. Isolation. Corruption. Delusion. Catastrophe. The Forbidden City, which was supposed to project divine authority, had instead severed the imperial nervous system. When the dynasty finally fell in 1912, the last emperor, Puyi, remained in the Forbidden City, still playing at ruling a vanished empire, until a warlord finally expelled him in 1924. The Golden Cage had consumed 3 centuries and 2 dynasties. On the morning of May 6, 1682, Louis XIV abandoned Paris and moved his entire court to Versailles. It was a statement of intent. The King of France would no longer live among his subjects. He would live above them, in a palace so magnificent that it would dwarf every other structure in Europe. The parallels to the Forbidden City are impossible to ignore. Like the Ming emperors, Louis XIV understood that architecture is power. Versailles was designed with military precision, endless galleries where nobles could be watched, apartments arranged by rank, gardens stretching to the horizon as if to suggest the king's authority had no boundary. It was theater on a scale previously unimagined, and every French aristocrat became an actor in the production. But Louis's genius, or his curse, went deeper than mere ostentation. By forcing the nobility to abandon their provincial power bases and congregate at Versailles, he neutralized the feudal system that had threatened royal authority for centuries. The nobles who once commanded armies on their own land now competed for the honor of holding the king's shirt while he dressed. They became domesticated, transformed from warriors into courtiers, their fangs filed down, their independence traded for proximity to the throne. The system worked brilliantly. For exactly 1 century. As decades passed, Versailles ceased to be a tool of control and became a universe unto itself. Successive kings, Louis XV, then the catastrophically oblivious Louis XVI, inherited not merely a palace but an entire cosmology. The court developed its own language, its own customs, its own economy divorced from the nation that funded it. The king woke to ceremony. He ate in ceremony. He went to bed in ceremony. Every moment was choreographed, every gesture weighted with symbolism. And in this relentless theater, actual governance withered. Why concern yourself with grain prices or tax rebellions when there are intricate questions of precedence to resolve? Who gets to stand closest to the king during the morning levee? Which duchess has the right to sit in the presence of which prince? These were the questions that consumed Versailles while France emptied its treasury in foreign wars and debt spiraled toward infinity. The isolation was self-reinforcing, ministers filtered bad news, knowing the king would punish the messenger rather than address the message. The court, cushioned by unimaginable luxury, convinced itself that France was as glorious as their gilded hall suggested. Meanwhile, 15 miles away in Paris, bread prices were climbing. Harvests were failing. The credibility gap between the monarchy and its subjects had become a chasm. The revolution, when it came, moved with terrifying speed. The tennis court oath. The storming of the Bastille. The Declaration of Rights. And through it all, Louis XVI remained at Versailles, paralyzed by the decision-making apparatus of absolute monarchy, unable to comprehend that the old rules no longer applied. On October 5, 1789, a mob of Parisian women, driven by hunger and rage, marched on Versailles. They invaded the palace, surged through the Hall of Mirrors, broke into the Queen's apartments. The king and his family were forced into carriages and hauled back to Paris, prisoners of the revolution they had failed to see coming. Versailles had promised to elevate the monarchy beyond the reach of ordinary mortals. Instead, it had blinded the king to the forces gathering below. The palace that was supposed to project invincibility had made the crown fragile. 4 years later, Louis XVI's head fell into a basket beneath the guillotine's blade, and the monarchy that had ruled France for 8 centuries ceased to exist. The pattern repeats. The palace protects the ruler from threats. Then it protects him from information. Finally, it protects him from reality itself. And when reality crashes through the gates, it arrives with blood in its teeth. We could trace this pattern back further still, to the great palace of Constantinople, where Byzantine emperors spent a millennium playing games of intrigue behind purple silk curtains while their empire slowly bled out. The Byzantine court refined palace politics into an art form so lethal it gave us the word Byzantine as a synonym for labyrinthine complexity. Emperors were routinely deposed, blinded, poisoned, strangled. Factions within the military, the aristocracy, and the clergy waged shadow wars for control of the throne. The imperial bureaucracy became so elaborate, so self-referential, that actual governance became almost incidental to the mechanics of administration. And while emperors obsessed over theological disputes and ceremonial protocol, the provinces fell away. The Anatolian theme system, the military infrastructure that had defended the empire for centuries, crumbled from neglect. When the Seljuk Turks arrived in the 11th century, they found the frontier virtually undefended because the emperors in Constantinople had been too absorbed in palace intrigues to notice the danger. Emperor after emperor repeated the same mistakes, concentrating power too narrowly, alienating provincial leaders, draining the treasury on lavish court expenditures while the army starved. The pattern played out over centuries rather than decades, but the destination was the same. In 1453, when Mehmed II's cannons finally breached the Theodosian walls, the last emperor died fighting in the streets while his court had been arguing over religious minutiae until the final hours. Even Byzantium's legendary longevity becomes, in the end, a testament to the cage's power. The empire survived for 1,000 years after Rome fell. But it survived as a slowly dying organism, trapped in its own ceremonial amber, unable to adapt, unable to reform, unable to break free from the palace logic that insisted form mattered more than function. So we return to the iron law. Power builds walls. The walls become cages. The cages consume empires. The pattern has 5 stages, and they proceed with mathematical certainty. First, a triumphant ruler constructs a palace to reflect his power. The architecture declares, "I am untouchable. I am divine. I am separate." Second, the palace develops its own internal logic, its own hierarchies, its own reality disconnected from the world beyond the walls. Third, intermediaries, eunuchs, courtiers, ministers, accumulate power by controlling access to the ruler. Information is filtered. Bad news is suppressed. Reality is curated. Fourth, while the ruler performs ceremonies and resolves court intrigues, the actual empire decays. Infrastructure crumbles. Corruption metastasizes. Threats gather. Fifth, reality breaches the walls. The collapse, when it comes, is shockingly swift because the rulers, living in a carefully maintained illusion, never saw it coming. 3 empires, separated by geography and time, walked this path to the same destination. The Ming and Qing from the Forbidden City. The Bourbons from Versailles. The Byzantines from Constantinople. The architecture differed, but the blueprint for catastrophe remained identical. Now raise your eyes to the present day. In Washington, D.C., an entire ecosystem has evolved to insulate leadership from unpleasant facts. In Beijing, a surveillance state gives the illusion of control while provincial officials systematically falsify economic data. In Moscow, advisors learn that telling the president what he wants to hear is safer than telling him the truth. The cages are not built of stone anymore. They're constructed from information bubbles, from loyalty tests, from the universal human tendency to shoot the messenger. They're built when leaders surround themselves with yes-men. When dissent is treated as disloyalty. When proximity to power becomes more important than competence. The names change. The technology evolves. But the pattern endures because it is rooted in something deeper than any particular political system. It is rooted in human nature itself, in our desperate need to believe we are special, that the rules applying to others do not apply to us, that our power will last forever. History offers no prophecies. Only warnings. And the warning is simple: the palace always becomes a prison. The walls that protect you from your enemies will eventually protect you from the truth. And empires that lose contact with reality do not survive the reacquaintance. The Forbidden City stands empty now, a museum where tourists photograph the Dragon Throne and imagine the splendor. Versailles is a UNESCO World Heritage Site where guides explain how the Hall of Mirrors once represented the pinnacle of European civilization. The Great Palace of Constantinople is rubble beneath Turkish Istanbul. But somewhere, in some seat of power, another ruler is building walls. Surrounding himself with advisors who tell him what he wants to hear. Mistaking the calm inside the palace for peace in the empire. The cage is being built again. It always is. And history, which does not repeat but certainly rhymes, is sharpening its knives and waiting for the walls to fall.